Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 1987 that Def Leppard's Hysteria was released, and it went on to be a huge hit, even bigger than the 1983 release Pyromania. Now, Hysteria undoubtedly had great songs on it, in that sort of pop metal genre that was quintessentially 80s. And the production style was quintessentially 80s too. But the songs themselves absolutely stand the test of time. They are great songs. But in some ways, the process that made Hysteria was everything that was really starting to go wrong with the music industry. Now, the album took many years to make, 4 years in total, which is really, really excessive. And there were good reasons and bad reasons, in my view, why this happened. Let's start with the good reason. By good reason, I mean a reason that's obviously perfectly understandable. It was in the midst of recording this album that tragedy struck the band, and it really showed the resilience of the band as a whole. And this was when Rick Allen, the drummer for the band, lost his left arm in a car accident. And if you're a drummer and you lose an arm, that's kind of it. But they stuck by him, which I think is not only admirable but inspirational. And in the time that he was recovering, he learned to play drums with one hand while foot pedals that were hooked to electronic drums, which were obviously huge in the 80s, Simmons electronic drums, his feet would trigger various sounds that sort of substituted what he would have normally played with his left hand. And so this was something made possible by that very 80s technology of electronic drums, which were the latest and greatest thing at the time. And it also showed a great deal of Rick's personal resilience and the camaraderie of the band as a whole. So that was a good thing, the fact that they were able to come together in that difficult moment. And that obviously, though, was going to make the album take a bit longer to record. The other reason is a reason that I don't particularly like. And this was that extreme perfectionism of the producer, Robert Mutt Lange, who is, to be fair, a legend. And he got the best out of the band, but he was so precise, such a perfectionist, that the album almost had a mechanical sound to it because everything was made perfect. Let's re-record this, not just this measure or this bar 10 times. Let's re-record this note and we'll splice this note in from that take and that. And I mean, it was just so excessive. And it was sort of symptomatic of the perfectionism that was taking hold in the music industry, where I tend to prefer more of a human sound. If you're a good enough musician, you can afford to make some minor mistakes and get away with it. And I think that that's worth preserving for the continuity of the overall performance. But this view was becoming more and more out of fashion in the late 80s, where you had people like Lang producing an album like this that was really so perfectionized to death that the sound at the end was just perfect. And you had people like Trevor Horn, who were perfectionists in their own right, with their sound sort of making the producer the sort of king. And don't get me wrong, Trevor Horn was incredibly successful and had some great albums. Hysteria's a great album, but I'm just trying to show you another perspective of how you can use all of the new technology, because the 80s did sound like the future, and no decade since ever really has. You can use all that technology while still being very human. I think Peter Gabriel helped to prove that. But in any case, this album had all of those futuristic 80s sounds, from the polysynths to some of the new MIDI technology to the Simmons drums and that larger than life in your face production. And again, once we get to the 90s, producers sort of pulled back and said, let's not be so in your face and futuristic, which is why the 80s is this paradox paradox, where albums sound both dated because you go instantly within 1 second of hearing it, oh, that's an 80s album, but at the same time, it sounds futuristic because no one even tries to sound futuristic anymore, with some exceptions. You could argue that, yay, Kanye West has done in the hip hop realm some futuristic things, but certainly in rock and mainstream pop, we've given up on looking to the future. So, in that sense, Hysteria is one of those albums that it has everything good and bad about the 80s on it. And it was huge, absolutely huge, and it deserved to be. The work that the guys in the band put into it really did pay off. And Rick Allen's return from possible nothingness to being an inspiration to people for overcoming difficulties, physical and otherwise, was obviously something that was, I think, really important for people around the world. So happy anniversary to Hysteria. If you were around in the 80s, you probably had this album. And because all the songs are so good, why not listen to it today? Like, subscribe. We will see you next time.